I got a question here from someone in the Discord that I want to just go over. I won't reveal their name or anything like that. I just want to go over it real quick because I thought it was a very good question. They ask, "Hey JW, hope you're having a good Sunday. I was wondering if you had any advice for what to do when you're really questioning everything. Like, I've seen results from recent tournaments and Luke Metal won a lot and Senti has won a lot, and it's got me really second guessing my choices for the Players' Cup. Before I was excited and now I'm just scared. I don't have any expectations for the cup, but I just really want people to see me and be like, he's a good player. Sorry, I know this is a lot, but I really do appreciate any advice you have." So I wrote back, I said, questioning is natural, right? Like every tournament that I go to, I literally question. And I'm probably the person, if you ask like my friend group, Riley, Andrew, Natalie, everyone in that friend group that I have, they'll tell you, like, the night before am so nervous about my deck choice that I'll be making cuts and making switches, up until registration. Like I'll second guess something and just like go on a whim and go away from the group. Like that actually happened in Roanoke where we had this list and I was thinking, okay, the night before I'm gonna change, I'm gonna just change the whole deck. I'm gonna play something completely different. I ended up sticking with the deck and it turned out really well. And I just trusted my results and I trusted the results of my friends and we got there, But the point being is that you're always going to be questioning every time you put yourself in this position, right, of performance. You're always going to question yourself whether or not it's, for me, it was music. For you and I, it's Pokemon. But anytime, a job interview, you're always going to kind of question whether or not what you're saying or doing is correct. And that's natural. So how do you channel that? I think that's like the bigger question, because like acknowledging that you have that anxiety about the Players' Cup or really about anything in life, like, is good. I mean, it's something that every human has, but how you take that energy and you channel it into a good performance. Now that's different. I talk a little bit about when we refer to Pokemon specifically, I think there are three things that go into a tournament performance. I mean, these are, certainly there are other things, but these are the three main things. First thing is, your deck choice. Like what your deck list actually looks like. Like, is it a consistent list or is it just like built well? The second thing is your in-game play. So are your mechanics good? Is your sequencing good? Is your prize checking good? And then the third thing is just the metagame. And so if we look at all those three, right, like the first thing you can control is your in-game play. Like that's the one thing you have complete and total control over. The second thing that you have, control over, like to an extent, is the deck list, right? I mean, you control your own deck list. It might not be the right one for the metagame, but you control the 60 cards that you play. And then the last thing, of course, is what the metagame looks like. And that's the one that's the biggest question mark for a lot of people. And that's where they get the most nervous. But I kind of think that if you have the first two under control, if you have your in-game mechanics and you have your deck choice, and you've built your deck well, like it's a good list, then if you lose out because the metagame was just wrong for you, then I think that that's okay. I mean, I look back at my performances and be like, I can't be mad at myself because I picked a deck that I thought would be good. I built a good list. I played really well, but unfortunately I ran up against, a bunch of decks that I either wasn't expecting or that just had a good matchup against mine for no particular reason. And I think you can't really doubt yourself if that happens to you. So I think a lot of people get stuck in that third one. They're like, well, did I make a good metagame choice or not? And then they end up like focusing a little bit too much on the metagame as opposed to focusing on, do I have a good deck and am I playing correctly? And so I think that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from. Anyway, long story short, get your own house in order before worrying about what the metagame looks like. Always have been a competitor, and add that to my anxiety. I have issues just starting because I hate losing and don't want to look so bad. But at the same time, I refuse to just play the meta, so I'm doing it to myself. Playing the meta is not necessarily what guarantees you success, but it's like a good indicator, right? Like you can win a tournament with a subpar deck. Like people do it all the time. But, you know, again, it's like trusting your results, right? Like if you see, you know, Eternatus has just been blowing up. It's been doing so well. If you refuse to like either have an answer to that or play that deck yourself, then yeah, I think there's a little bit of onus on you. But if you know that you're making a good deck choice based on your testing results, based on results that you've seen from other people, right? Because a lot of this too is there's anxiety in not knowing whether or not you are making, there's a lot of anxiety in not knowing whether or not you're making a good choice comparative to other players. So you might think like, oh, somebody has some like secret deck that I don't know about that I should have figured out. Or I'm playing a list, but maybe it's not as good as this other guy who's playing, you know, the same archetype, things like that. And so just trying to overcome that can be difficult for sure. But it's just something that you understand the more you go, the more you play. But it's tough, right? Because you want to be the best. You want to like win every match. And then when you don't, there's that disconnect, right? Because you feel like you put in the time, you feel like you put in the effort, and then you come back with a subpar result. And I think for me, I just generally don't like, I'm pretty like rubbery when it comes to having, you know, insults or bad performance, you know, hit me. But I know that's not the case for everybody. So I think for me, it's just been and I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for anyone else. But for me, it's been a combination of just like doing it a lot, like failing a lot to get over that feeling. And then again, putting yourself in positions to win by doing the things that we were just talking about, by building good decks and, you know, being completely on top of the in-game mechanics. Because I'll tell you what, like a tournament can be decided, like an entire tournament can be decided by one turn. You know, I mean, and that's like, that's really, you know, that's very eloquent, you know, and it's a little bit highbrow. But you think about it, like every great tournament winner, like to think about winning a tournament, especially at a big level, is absolutely insane to think about, because all of the decisions that you make throughout the course of a tournament, you know, go into whether or not you win. All the decks that you face, which is just random, go into whether or not you win. You know, how you play on that day, the just metagame as a whole, what other decks beat and play against go into that. So it's a whole combination of things that go into winning a tournament. And it's just impossible to predict. So I kind of see that as saying like, oh, well, it's impossible for me to know, and it's possible for me to know exactly. So it's just out of my control. I made the list change mistake in POG. I smashed day one, and before day two, I started looking at other people's lists for the same deck and messed around with mine too much. Yeah, and that's another thing too, is like you'll get better with that over time, where the more experience you have, the more you'll know, okay, I performed well with this, I don't want to change it. Or this was the list I had been testing, and you know, I know that I have good matchups here and I don't want to mess around with that. Basically just like trusting your instinct. Like instinct is a huge thing in Pokemon as well, because you have to just make certain decisions. Like you literally cannot test every single deck for the amount of time that you need for the, you know, in the correct matchups that you need. Like at a certain point, you have to just take a leap of faith. And so how do you do that? I think a lot of that comes from experience, like taking that leap of faith. It's either somebody that's so inexperienced that they don't know any better, or somebody super experienced that knows, you know, exactly what not to do. And what not to do would be like changing everything up at the last second, you know, over-teching, under-teching, I guess, in certain instances, but just like not trusting your testing is kind of a result of like overthinking what you're trying to do. The problem is I don't have confidence in my play, and then I make mistakes. That's a huge one too. To speak on that, I mean, that is a lot about for me, coming from a music background, a lot of that is like repetition. So making sure that you get your reps in, like it's like lifting weights. You know, you get your reps in, you do the same action over and over, and eventually that action becomes much more, you know, inhibited in your body, right? Like it's the same idea. The more you do that action, the more your brain, the myelin that connects the brain cells fires the synapse at the right, you know, exactly right. And, you know, you're going to be able to repeat success. That's why anyone can do anything, right? It's like if they do it well and they are able to repeat that and like practice that, they'll eventually be able to do it, you know, right on call. And that's a huge thing with music, where we have to repeat something. Like we have to repeat a piece of music exactly how we want to play it. And so to be able to do that, we have to practice a lot of the basics, you know, and this is same for a card game. Like you have to practice the basics of sequencing. You have to practice the other thing, like prizing. You know, that's a very basic one that even I will miss. You know, certainly I don't count my prizes every single game on stream. And I certainly don't do that in tournaments. And that's something I need to work on. So like even the players at the top need to work on these things. But there are actionable steps, all that to say, there are actionable steps that you can take as a player to get better at the game. And, you know, whether or not you do them, whether or not you take certain steps in the game, will make you better. Because I was told once that like you don't stay the same. You know, you either get better or worse. And that's a little that's a little harsh, you know, that's a little harsh, but like in anything, right, over a day, like if you don't do it, you're not getting better. So inherently you're getting worse is essentially the idea. So if you don't play a lot of Pokemon, or if you don't practice your mechanics, then you're gonna get worse, like you're not getting better. So to have that anxiety about playing is very real and very valid. And I've certainly felt that before. But at the same time, you have to let it go. You have to put yourself out there and you have to take a chance. And you have to take a chance consistently. Let's go. Thank you, Dollar Bill Will, for the gifted sub. I just like spent the first 25 minutes of stream just ranting. Clip it and post it on YouTube. I might have to, yeah. I might have to.